Thank you, Dr. Shiva. Are you able to hear me now?
Yes, very much.
Yes,
Oh,
Anup.
great. I also have my colleague Cyril. Can you also please unmute Cyril?
Okay. Cyril, yes, here. Yeah.
Okay, Dr. Shiva. So, a very good morning to, or actually, very good afternoon to everyone. It's an honor to be part of this amazing summit, and thank you very much for having us. My name is Anup, and I am part of the WFM team for Global Business Services IBM India. And I have with me my colleague Cyril, who leads the talent acquisition for GBS. Now, COVID-19 has created a crisis, and every time there is a crisis, it also opens up opportunities and drives innovation. Now, this pandemic has actually driven us to innovate the way that we hire. And this has led to the concept of digital hiring, which may be the new normal. Now, over the next 15 minutes, Cyril will be taking us all through the digital hiring journey that IBM has embarked upon. Over to you, Cyril. I'll be sharing my screen, and Cyril will be taking us through the presentation.
Okay, Anup, I'm going to wait for you to start sharing the presentation. All right, I hope all of you can hear me loud and clear. Good afternoon to the esteemed members of the jury, and a very warm welcome to all participants on this webinar. None of us would have imagined the kind of impact COVID-19 was going to have on all of us. I remember the first lockdown was approximately 3 weeks, and today, almost 100 days later, most of us, if not all of us, are still working from home. So our thoughts at IBM when we heard of COVID-19 were, how are we going to onboard this huge pipeline of candidates that we had created for the following quarter? How are we going to continue to interview and select people for opportunities that we had? And for all the people who join us, how are we going to ensure that they get their laptops at the earliest so they can become productive? So this, coupled with other thoughts, led us to move or transform from the traditional mode of hiring to what we now refer to as digital hiring at IBM. Anup, if we can go to the next slide. So what we've seen in the last 100 days, what has digital hiring done for us? It has increased our ability to target a larger pool of candidates across the length and breadth of the country. We've seen that we have a flexibility to source and schedule candidates on the same day. And the participation rate in interviews has substantially gone up from scheduling to interview. And all of these have combined to have a positive impact on the time to fill rate. Next slide. So how did we move from the traditional mode of hiring to a digital hiring mode at IBM? Next slide. We've broken it up into 4 large pillars. So all our assessments, our skill-based assessments became remote. All our interviews became digital. A KY IBM, or as we call it, the Know Your IBM sessions became virtual or digital. And then our onboarding became digital as well. So the first pillar, which is in terms of skill-based assessment, in the traditional mode of hiring, we would invite candidates to come to an IBM office. Anup, we can go to the next slide. And they would take these assessments at our premises. And if they cleared these assessments, then they would subsequently move on to the next rounds of interviews. However, today the skill-based proctored assessments are shared with candidates, and they can take these assessments at their time, at their convenience, and obviously at their premise. So I know the question that's going through your mind went through our mind as well. How do we ensure that while candidates take these assessments at their premises, they don't engage in unfair practices? So we're using 2 specific techniques. One is called the test tab proctoring, and the other is the image proctoring technique. In test tab proctoring, what we do is the candidates have to, Anup, next slide, please. So what we have to do is that the candidates have to take these tests only in the full screen mode. As you can see from the snapshot below, the candidate has to okay the permission to take the test in the full screen mode. And every attempt to exit or leave this test window is logged and tracked. So the interviewer, when he or she sees the outcome of the assessment, What they see is obviously the scores, and along with it, they see a log of how many times the candidate, if at all, has exited the full screen mode. So this helps them take an informed decision on whether they want to go ahead with the interviews for this candidate, or if the candidate has exited the mode too many times, they might want to decide that we don't want to proceed with this candidate. In addition to this, what we've done is the image proctoring technique. So in image proctoring, any candidate who attempts an assessment has to have a webcam which can be enabled. Again, these are one of the permissions which the candidate has to give upfront. And there are periodic snapshots of the candidate which are captured while he or she is attempting the assessment. And this is captured for the entire duration of the assessment. So the snapshot below shows you the candidate and it gets captured through the entire assessment. This again is provided to the interviewer along with the outcome of the assessment. So what an interviewer typically looks at is what is the score on the skill-based assessment, how many times the candidate would have exited the full screen mode, and he or she can see that the candidate they are about to interview is the same candidate who's taken the assessment. And what our data has shown us over the last 100 days is that our past percentages prior to the digital hiring mode, our past percentages and what they are today is actually reduced by 3%. So we feel that the techniques are working and the outcomes that we are getting is what we had in mind. So this is the first big change that we've done. Obviously participation rates as well, and I will refer to it through my presentation. Participation rates have gone up substantially because the candidates today can take the test at their premise. The next big change that we did was to make interviews digital or virtual. While we have tried our best to retain a flavor of an in-person interview and ensure candidates feel as close to an in-person interview as we possibly could deliver to them, we've replaced it by digital interview. Here again, because it is an in-person interview and the candidate can take it from their premises, and panels can also take it at their convenience, the participation at both ends has increased. So earlier we used to have, like I said, candidates would walk into an IBM premises, take the assessment, and if they cleared it, then they would move on to interview round. Typically, the first round would be telephonic, and thereafter, the second round would be face-to-face. But now, what we've done is we've made all interviews digital or virtual. Next slide, please. So Webex is the primary mode for conducting interviews, and we insist that the webcams are mandatorily kept on through the entire duration of the interview. This is for two reasons. One, a candidate should get an experience of an in-person interview. Also, when we are talking to each other in a video mode, I think when we look at each other, the flavor of the interview is far, far different from when you're just looking at a blank screen. And there are guidelines that are shared both with panelists and candidates in advance. This is a change that we brought about when COVID hit us. And so we've continued to educate both our population of interviewers or panelists, as we refer to, and all candidates who attend these interviews. So typically it would involve finding a quiet, well-lit place which is free from distractions for the duration of the interview. Show up early just to check that your audio and video is working fine, or at least be on time. And typically what we ask the interviewers to do is begin with some small talk, ensure that the candidate gets comfortable, and then actually get into the duration of the interview. So what we've observed is that while the duration of the interviews has gone up, our outcomes are pretty much consistent with the traditional modes of interview. So whatever past percentages or selection rates we had in the traditional mode of interview, our selection rates continue to be consistent with those outcomes. So this is the second big change that we brought about on the interview process. Obviously, once a candidate is selected, he or she receives the offer from IBM. And what we do is between them receiving the offer and actually joining the organization, we have a concept called Know Your IBM or KY IBM session. Now, what are these sessions about? Typically, they'll talk about IBM as an organization, our policies and practices. What are the career prospects of each and every candidate who joins us? What are the opportunities that he will get when he's associated with IBM in terms of what are the areas that he can work on, and also, what are his learning opportunities at IBM? These are the typical questions that come up at most of these sessions. These sessions are where an IBM or somebody who's going to become an IBM typically gets to interact with people from the business and answer most of their queries. Obviously, in this environment, we've moved to a digital setup to execute these sessions. And if candidates have any questions which is particular to their offer, which is with regards to their compensation and so on and so forth, we have a breakout session at the end where individual talent acquisition partners address their queries one-on-one. As you can see, we've got some feedback on the top of the slide. We've managed to execute it for the last 100 days, and the NPS on these sessions is as high as 80. All of these three changes that we've made, from making assessments remote to making interviews digital and to making the KY IBM session virtual, has impacted our conversion rate. Our offer to onboard conversion rates are up by 5% in this quarter. And we feel that all of this is taking us in the right direction. The last change that we've brought about is onboarding becoming digital. While there was a lot of discussion about it anyway happening, I think COVID just helped accelerate the entire process. So there are different steps that we've done to make the onboarding digital, and we've ensured that candidates can onboard the organization on the stipulated date. In fact, I'm pretty proud to say that for the entire duration of COVID-19, we've onboarded each and every candidate as per his or her scheduled date. And how we did it was a big challenge, but that's something that we overcame, and it is now like we call the new normal at IBM. So we start with the offer accept handshake. Typically, when a candidate accepts an offer, they will receive a welcome email which introduces them to step 2, which is the pre-hire destination. Now, what is a pre-hire destination? It is a place where you can have all your queries answered. It will tell you which forms you need to fill in order to onboard at IBM. It will tell you if you have any queries with respect to, again, your offer or any last minute queries with respect to relocation. It will direct you to Quinn, which shows up in step 4. So Quinn is introduced to all the pre-hires in step 2. And Quinn is a chatbot which typically answers all your frequently asked questions. At the same time, they get introduced to the onboarding success partner, as we call it, who will eventually onboard them. And the onboarding success partner is also available to answer all their queries. So we understood that in these COVID times, everybody was worried as to will IBM onboard me? If IBM onboards me, how do I, get to maneuver into a new organization? And we've tried to cover all of that while doing their onboarding digitally. So we give them an option to talk to their onboarding success partner who can help them with any queries they have with respect to filling up of forms. We have Quinn because the onboarding success partner will be available for a certain amount of hours. Quinn is a chatbot which is available 24/7, and they can ask questions and Quinn will answer them real time. Also, we then move them to introducing 10 days before they onboard us, and that is step 3. We introduce them to the new hire lounge. So that is a lounge that we've created on Slack. Everybody who's going to join us in the next 10 days gets invited to that lounge, and it allows them to interact and talk to other people who are going to join us, as well as talk to their onboarding success partners if they still have any queries that are unanswered. All of this is essentially a build up to day 1, which is step 5, where they actually join the organization. And they would have already filled up all the documentation. It is validated by the onboarding success partner, and if everything is in order, we go ahead and onboard them. Now, when they onboard, they get introduced to IBM specific tools like Verse, Slack, Webex, Checkpoint, Workday, and so on and so forth. So that's where we created the new hire station. So the day they onboard, we introduce them to the new hire station, and they can go through. These are tools that will become part of their DNA while they are with IBM. So we introduce them to them. And again, we've kept a follow-up welcome session. So if they're having challenges navigating any of these tools, or if they have questions on any of these tools, the onboarding success partner will address it in the welcome session. So while the welcome session is typically on day 1, there is also a follow-up welcome session, or as we call it, a playback session, 7 days after the candidate onboard. Because we understand that in these challenging times, he or she could have multiple issues, either with updating their payroll or bank details on Workday, their insurance details on Workday. So we play back with them 7 days later to ensure that if they have not been able to cover any of these activities, we help them complete it. Obviously, this is a playback 7 days later, but in the interim, there is always the Slack channel that they can reach out to and say that I'm having a challenge with so and so, and we help them address it.
Cyril, let us complete it in next 4 minutes, please.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you for the time check. Uh, the next one is on obviously day one. The end of day one is when we give them their W3 or IBM login credentials, and we take their request for laptops. In this environment, in a traditional environment, they would get their laptops on the same day, on the day of onboarding. But today we have to ship it to them. So we typically collect these details starting from the offer accept handshake, and we try to ensure that the laptops reach them on the day they onboard, or at least get dispatched to them on the day they onboard. Lastly, the stakeholder sessions are set up for any IT related queries. So when you get a laptop today from IBM to begin work with IBM, it has a self-help setup instructions. But if a new joiner still faces challenges, they can log into these IT sessions, which are typically held twice a week, to ensure and take help from the IT team to set up their laptop. Also for Workday, those sessions are held in the first half of the month. And if they are having any challenges to fill their Workday details, because that is related to their salary and their insurance, they can take help from the specialist to complete their details on Workday. So all in all, we've been able to onboard 3,000 plus people virtually, and we've been able to ensure that everybody's payroll details, their medical insurance details are completed 100%, even in these challenging times. Lastly, we've altered the new hire survey to not only capture feedback on the process, but also to understand the mental health or the mental well-being of all people who are going to come and join IBM. Next slide, please. So these are the challenges that we faced. I think I've covered them pretty much in my presentation. I think one that I would like to call out is there was a restriction when COVID-19 started on shipment of goods. But as things started to ease out, we were able to get better at it. And now we've built in a process where the moment the candidate accepts the offer, he or she gives us their PIN code details, where they are. And we ensure that we are able to ship laptops to them the moment they join. We need to get physical signatures on certain mandatory documents like ESI, PF, and so on. Right now, we are working with virtual signatures, and we are hoping that we'll be able to extend this to BAU in the long run. And the last one is their badges are kept ready. However, they don't need to use them at this point in time because none of us is working from office. But the day we move back to working from office, the badges will be handed over to all employees. So that's it from our side, and we would love to get some feedback and take any questions if you have them.
Okay, so I'll start quickly, Cyril. So this onboarding is across the world, or it's only India?
Across the world, Milan.
So the 3,000 number that you mentioned is in India or around?
That is India. I didn't share the world numbers, but it's across the world.
Okay, thank you.
Cyril and Anup, thanks so much. This is Deepak. I have two questions to you. One was this digital interviews. Were you doing digital interviews pre-COVID as well, or it was something that just started post-COVID?
Okay, so we weren't doing digital interviews pre-COVID. Pre-COVID, we would want candidates to come into the IBM office, and the interviews, like I said, the first round would typically be telephonic, and the second round would be face-to-face, in person. But obviously, with COVID coming, we had to quickly move to the digital mode of interviews. So now candidates don't walk into IBM at all. And the first round, second round, and if there are any more rounds, everything happens on Webex, start to finish.
So for the location, say a candidate is in some other city and your office is some other city, those were also done in person, were not done over Webex or some other platform?
So typically, we would ask them to get to the nearest IBM location, and that was one pool that we were restricted from sourcing unless it was an absolute dire necessity. So we would ask them to get to the closest IBM location. But today we can tap into all of those candidates. But previously, like if there was a skill which is absolutely not available anywhere but in a remote location, we would go ahead and do interviews for them the digital way, but then it was only limited to that population.
Okay. Second question, you mentioned that laptops were dispatched on the day of onboarding.
Yeah.
Now, we know for sure that dispatching is in our control, but getting it to their place is not. And
Yes.
and you would have faced some challenges, which you had mentioned in the slide as well. Question that I have is, what happened during the time frame that a person is onboarded and say assets are not delivered? How did you manage that gap?
I think Anup, you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. We also have a concept called bring your own device, wherein we enable the candidates' devices to function. So if they have a Mac, they can go ahead with all functions. We also have a process wherein we enable the mobile devices so that they can at least go through the mails and some other basic tools that is required for a day-to-day function. But yes, from a laptop delivery perspective, we did face challenges, especially in red zones and lockdown areas, and we still have those challenges in a very small pocket. But by and large, I think we've managed to tie up with some of the big names in the courier industry, and we managed to dispatch almost about 95% laptops to all the joinees that we've had from the time that the lockdown has started.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, any other questions, guys?
Any questions?
Why?
Now, if there are any questions, I will pass on Cyril and Anup.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
All the
Thanks.
best.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Before we leave,
Have a great afternoon.
yeah, I just want to say, thank you very much for having us, and it's really significant that we get to present this on a day when we're celebrating International WFM Professionals Day. Thank you very much for having us.
Thanks, Anup. It's
Thank
really
you.
a pleasure.